You step outside, your drink in hand, expecting the usual quiet morning, but instead, you're hit with a wave of rage. Your mailbox, crushed, destroyed, the twisted metal scattered across the lawn like a crime scene. And there she is, Karen, the HOA tyrant, casually driving away in her red SUV. She knows what she's done. She's making her move, and it's personal. This isn't just a mailbox. It's a declaration of war. She thinks she rules this neighborhood, but I've got a titanium surprise that'll flip her world upside down. Curious how this showdown gets juicy with a dash of petty revenge? Drop a comment with where you're watching from and buckle up for the chaos. Karen's about to discover some mailboxes bite back harder than her attitude. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting the usual morning, but my new gray mailbox lay in ruins, twisted metal and broken plastic scattered across the lawn. Just 3 weeks ago, I had spent $200 on it, now reduced to debris. My neighbor Wes Harlan was already standing at his driveway, arms crossed, shaking his head. Wes is a 40-year-old electrician with a kind of dry humor that makes HOA meetings bearable. He walked over as I stood there, mouth hanging open, trying to process the destruction. "Let me guess," he said, pointing at the carnage. "Darlene Whitlow wasn't happy about your mailbox color." I looked at him confused, and he continued. "She was complaining to anyone who'd listened yesterday about how your gray mailbox was ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. Apparently everything needs to be white or beige in her perfect little world." As the pieces started to fit together, it dawned on me. Last night, I had heard a car engine revving around midnight, followed by a sound like metal on metal. I peeked out my window just in time to catch a glimpse of red taillights speeding off, realizing then that this wasn't just random destruction. Karen was sending a message. Darlene Whitlow, age 38, the iron-fisted chairman of our homeowners association, had taken it upon herself to make my life a living hell. It wasn't just about the mailbox. It was her way of asserting control, a desperate attempt to regain power after her messy divorce. She's the kind of woman who measures her neighbor's grass with a ruler and sends violation notices if it's a quarter-inch too long. Ever since her messy divorce 2 years ago, she'd thrown herself into HOA politics with the fury of someone who'd lost control of everything else in her life. Her 16-year-old son Kyle spends most of his time locked in his room playing video games, probably trying to avoid his mother's constant need to control every aspect of their lives and everyone else. As I swept up the plastic shards, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my blood pressure spike. Mailbox violation. Final warning. Darlene's message was ice cold and to the point. "Mr. Lane, your gray mailbox violates HOA aesthetic guidelines. All mailboxes must be white. Replace immediately or face fines. Don't make me remind you again. Darlene Whitlow, HOA." The email was time-stamped at 6:47 a.m., barely an hour after she'd probably destroyed my property. My jaw clenched as I read her email, each word stoking the fire in my chest. The sheer audacity of not only destroying my mailbox, but then demanding that I conform to her petty color standards was beyond belief. She had no idea who she was messing with. Wes, ever the realist, patted me on the back. "She's a problem, man. Don't let her push you around." I knew he was right. Darlene had bullied families out of the neighborhood with her constant fines and absurd rules, and now it seemed like I was her next target. That afternoon, I rummaged through my garage and found my old security camera. It was far from state-of-the-art, but it would do the job, catching license plates and faces with clear detail, just what I needed for the next stage of my plan. I disguised it inside a weathered utility box near my mailbox, angling it perfectly to capture anyone who came near my property. As I connected the final wire, I whispered to myself, "You want to play games, Darlene? Let's see how you like being caught red-handed." The red paint on my brick wall seemed to mock me as I cleaned it off with paint thinner. Each scrub felt like a small victory, but I knew this was just the beginning. Darlene thought she could intimidate me into submission, like she had with everyone else, but she'd picked the wrong guy this time. I'm a mechanic. I solve problems with my hands and my brain, and I don't back down from bullies, especially ones who hide behind HOA bylaws and neighborhood politics. As the sun set that evening, I stood in my driveway, looking at the empty spot where my mailbox used to be. The bent aluminum post stuck out of the ground like a metal gravestone, a testament to Darlene's midnight rampage. But instead of feeling defeated, I felt something else entirely: determination. She thought destroying my property would teach me a lesson about conformity and following her rules. Instead, she'd just taught me that some people only understand one language: consequences. And I was about to become fluent. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store with a plan forming in my mind. If Darlene wanted to play demolition derby with my mailbox, I'd give her something to hit, but not what she expected. I bought the cheapest aluminum mailbox they had, the kind that practically crumples if you look at it wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. I also picked up some powerful magnets and breakaway connectors. This wasn't going to be a permanent installation, it was going to be bait. In my garage, I created Mailbox 2.0. It looked like any other mailbox, but inside, I set up a magnetic system that would detach and roll harmlessly away when hit. I wanted to catch Darlene in the act without causing harm. Besides, I had bigger plans brewing in the back of my mind, plans that involved a much more permanent solution. After setting up the decoy mailbox, I did something that might have surprised even me. I sent Darlene an apology email. "Dear Miss Whitlow," I typed, forcing the words out. "I've replaced my mailbox with a new white one in compliance with HOA standards. I hope we can now move forward in a positive direction." It nearly killed me to type those words, but I needed her to think she'd won. Predators always come back to successful hunting grounds. That evening, Wes knocked with beers in hand and a grin. "Check this out," he said, showing me his phone. He'd been recording Darlene's behavior around my house for days. The footage revealed her driving slowly past, snapping pictures of my mailbox, even getting out to inspect it like she was planning something. "She's obsessed, man," Wes said, shaking his head. "I've never seen someone so worked up over a mailbox color. But here's the thing, she's not just targeting you." He showed me another video from his security camera, this one featuring our neighbor Sadie Vernon. Sadie was a 29-year-old bank employee who'd moved in 6 months ago, and she'd been trying to plant some colorful flowers in her front garden. The footage showed Darlene systematically destroying Sadie's flower bed in broad daylight, pulling up every single bloom and throwing them in a trash bag. He told Sadie the flowers were too vibrant for the neighborhood, Wes explained. "Can you believe that? Too vibrant? Since when are flowers a crime?" This revelation changed everything. Darlene wasn't just a nuisance, she was a force of fear in our neighborhood. Sadie, terrified and too isolated to fight back, had been suffering in silence. But now, I wasn't just a victim, I was standing up to her, and that might just be the spark we needed to ignite a neighborhood-wide rebellion. Together, we could end her reign of terror. The next night, my hidden camera captured exactly what I'd been waiting for. At 2:37 a.m., Darlene's red Highlander crept down the street with its headlights off. She parked 3 houses away and walked to my mailbox, carrying what looked like a baseball bat. The footage quality wasn't perfect in the darkness, but it clearly showed someone in Darlene's signature white windbreaker approaching my property with obvious malicious intent. What happened next was almost too good to be true. The ground was still wet from an earlier thunderstorm, and Darlene's white sneakers had zero traction on the slick grass. As she wound up to take her first swing at my decoy mailbox, her feet slipped out from under her completely. She went down hard, sliding across the wet lawn like she was stealing second base, her windbreaker now covered in mud and grass stains. The baseball bat went flying, landing in my neighbor's bushes with a loud crash. From my bedroom window, I watched her struggle to get back on her feet, looking around frantically to make sure nobody had witnessed her graceful tumble. Her designer glasses were hanging off one ear, and she kept wiping mud off her face with increasingly frantic gestures. When she finally managed to hit my mailbox, the magnetic connection worked perfectly. The whole thing detached and rolled harmlessly onto the grass, completely intact except for a small dent where the bat had connected. Darlene stood there for a full minute, staring at the undamaged mailbox lying on its side. I could practically see the confusion and frustration radiating from her mud-covered form. She'd expected the satisfying crash of destruction, but instead got a gentle thud and a perfectly functional mailbox that had simply taken a nap on my lawn. After looking around one more time, she limped back to her car, leaving muddy footprints across my driveway and a clearly visible trail of evidence. The next morning, I found a handwritten note tucked under the detached mailbox. "Listen up or get out." The handwriting was shaky, probably because she'd written it while sitting in her car with muddy hands, but the message was crystal clear. Darlene wasn't just trying to enforce HOA rules, she was trying to drive me out of the neighborhood entirely. This was personal, and she'd just made it a whole lot more personal. As I reattached the mailbox to its magnetic mount, I was already planning phase 2 of my strategy: Down in my garage, I had something special waiting, a small piece of titanium left over from a custom motorcycle project. Titanium is an interesting metal. It's incredibly strong, nearly indestructible, and has a tendency to win any argument with aluminum, plastic, or in this case, car bumpers. Wes wandered over as I was cleaning up the muddy mess Darlene had left behind. "She took the bait," I said, pointing to the obvious evidence scattered across my lawn. "But next time, she's going to get a lot more than she bargained for." "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing the gleam in my eye. I looked toward my garage, where my real project was waiting. Let's just say titanium has some very interesting properties when it comes to impact resistance. Word travels fast in a small neighborhood, especially when someone catches the HOA chairman falling flat on her face in the middle of the night. Wes, being an electrician with access to some serious projection equipment, decided to share Darlene's muddy mishap with the entire neighborhood in the most spectacular way possible. He borrowed a high-powered projector from his company and set it up in his garage, pointing it directly at his white garage door, which faced the main street where everyone could see it. That Friday evening, Wes set up an impromptu outdoor cinema. The footage of Darlene's humiliating fall was projected for the entire neighborhood. Neighbors stopped in their tracks, drawn to the spectacle. Sadie Vernon was the first to start laughing, and once she broke the ice, everyone else joined in. "Is that really Darlene?" asked one neighbor. "Oh my God, she actually brought a baseball bat," said another. The commentary was priceless, but the best part was watching people realize they weren't alone in their frustration with our neighborhood dictator. For months, everyone had been suffering in silence, thinking they were the only ones being harassed by Darlene's power trips. Of course. About 10 minutes into the screening, Darlene stormed down the street, her face turning crimson as she realized what everyone was watching. Her pristine white outfit, now a symbol of her failed authority, was the only thing left untouched as she marched, fuming, towards the source of her humiliation. "Turn that off immediately," she shrieked, pointing at the projection. "That's private property. You're invading my privacy." But her protests only made the crowd laugh harder, especially when the video showed her sliding across my lawn for the third time in slow motion. "Privacy," Wes called out from his garage. "Lady, you are on someone else's property committing vandalism. There's no privacy expectation when you're breaking the law." The crowd erupted in applause, and I could see Darlene's composure cracking like ice in a microwave. She tried to storm off dramatically, but her white sneakers, the same ones from the video, had even less traction on the dry pavement than they'd had on my wet grass. She stumbled twice before making it back to her house. The next morning, I received another email, more aggressive than before. "Mr. Lane, your continued violations and harassment will result in a $500.00 fine. You have 24 hours to comply or face more penalties. This is your final warning." The attached violation notice was riddled with absurd claims. I was reading this masterpiece of bureaucratic bullying when Sadie knocked on my door. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope in her hands. "I need to show you something," she said, glancing around to make sure Darlene wasn't watching. Inside the envelope were dozens of photographs she'd taken from her second-floor bedroom window over the past several weeks. The images showed Darlene prowling around my property at various times, always late at night, sometimes carrying tools or weapons. "He's been watching your house almost every night," Sadie explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "I started taking pictures because I was scared she might try to break in. But look at this one from 2 nights ago." The photo clearly showed Darlene attempting to hit my decoy mailbox, but the angle revealed something I'd missed in my own security footage. She'd brought a crowbar in addition to the baseball bat. This wasn't casual vandalism. She'd come prepared for serious destruction. "Why are you helping me?" I asked Sadie, genuinely curious about her motivation. Her answer surprised me with its honesty. "Because she destroyed my flower garden, and when I tried to replant it, she filed a complaint with the city claiming I was violating water restrictions. The city inspector came out and found nothing wrong, but the stress nearly gave me a panic attack. Nobody should have that much power over other people's lives." That afternoon, while I was working in my garage on what I privately called the real solution, Wes burst through the door with his phone in his hand. "Dude, you're not going to believe this," he said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Darlene just tried to hit your mailbox again, but she was so focused on the mailbox that she didn't notice I was live streaming the whole thing." He showed me the footage. Darlene approaching my decoy setup with renewed determination, taking a massive swing with her crowbar and watching in complete bewilderment as the mailbox simply detached and rolled away again. But this time was different. This time, she completely lost her temper. The video showed her kicking the detached mailbox, screaming at it like it had personally insulted her family, and then attempting to stomp on it with her white sneakers. The magnetic mounting system I'd designed was working perfectly. No matter how much abuse she heaped on it, the mailbox remained completely functional. Finally, in a fit of rage, she picked up the mailbox and hurled it into my front bushes before storming back to her car. The best part, Wes continued, barely able to contain his laughter, is the comments on the live stream. Everyone's asking who this crazy lady is and why she's so obsessed with your mailbox. One person even asked if she was having some kind of mental breakdown. The video's been shared 12 times already, and we only posted it an hour ago. As I watched Darlene's tantrum unfold on Wes's phone, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and determination. She'd escalated from simple vandalism to outright property destruction, and she was doing it in broad daylight now, completely confident that her position as HOA chairman made her untouchable. But every video, every photograph, and every witness was building a case that would eventually bring her down. Down in my garage, my real project was nearly complete. The titanium core was perfectly centered inside what looked like an ordinary white mailbox, and the steel post was anchored 3 feet deep in concrete. Tomorrow, I'd install the real thing, not the magnetic decoy, but a mailbox that would teach Darlene the difference between aluminum and titanium in the most expensive way possible. She thinks she's won, I told Wes as we watched the live stream comments pour in from entertained neighbors. But she's about to learn that some lessons cost a lot more than $500. Installation day arrived with perfect weather, sunny, clear, and with just enough of a breeze to make working outside comfortable. I'd spent the previous evening carefully preparing my masterpiece, a standard-looking white mailbox that concealed a titanium core surrounded by steel reinforcement. From the outside, it looked identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood, but inside, it was basically an immovable object disguised as everyday suburban furniture. Wes helped me install it, and I have to admit, we were both giddy with anticipation. We drove the steel post 3 feet deep into the earth, surrounding it with 80 pounds of concrete I mixed myself. The titanium core was welded perfectly in place, making this mailbox an immovable monument. No force, no matter how powerful, would ever make it budge. If someone wanted to destroy it, they'd need industrial equipment or a very good insurance policy. This thing could probably stop a truck, Wes observed as we put the finishing touches on the installation. He wasn't wrong. The titanium made it virtually indestructible, while the steel reinforcement distributed impact forces directly into the concrete foundation. It was engineered like a piece of defensive architecture, designed to win any argument with whatever Darlene decided to throw at it next. Sadie came over to admire our handiwork, bringing homemade cookies and a small camera she'd borrowed from her bank's security office. "I can hide this in my bedroom window," she said, pointing to the second floor of her house, which had a perfect view of my mailbox. "The zoom lens will catch everything, even at night." Her transformation from scared neighbor to active resistance member was remarkable, and I was grateful for her support. That evening, Darlene made her move. This time, she was in her Toyota Highlander, clearly aiming to ram my mailbox. Sadie's camera captured the whole thing. Darlene backed up and slammed into it at full speed. The sound was incredible, a massive metallic crash that echoed through the entire neighborhood, followed immediately by the sharp pop of her passenger side window exploding. The airbag deployed with a bang that was almost as loud as the initial impact, and steam started pouring from under her crumpled hood. Her pristine red Highlander had just learned the hard way that titanium doesn't compromise, negotiate, or give second chances. My mailbox stood there, as untouched as ever. 10 minutes later, no scratches, no dents, not a single mark on the white paint. It had become a silent testament to the laws of physics, unmoved by Darlene's frantic assault. The contrast was brutal. Her $15,000 SUV shattered, her rage undeterred, while my humble mailbox stood defiant, as if mocking her every move. The contrast was almost artistic. Her $15,000 SUV versus my $200 mailbox. And my mailbox had won so decisively, it wasn't even close. Neighbors started emerging from their houses as soon as they heard the crash, and by the time Darlene managed to climb out of her airbag-filled car, we had an audience of at least 20 people. She stood there in the middle of the street, her white outfit now stained with airbag powder, staring at her destroyed vehicle with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that gravity still worked. "What did you do to your mailbox?" she demanded, pointing an accusing finger at me. Her voice was shaky, probably from shock, but her eyes burned with the kind of rage you usually only see in nature documentaries about cornered predators. "That's not a normal mailbox. You did something to it." Of course, she was absolutely right, but proving it would be another matter entirely. Wes pulled out his phone and started live streaming again, narrating the scene like a sports commentator. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation here in Willowbrook Estates. It appears our HOA chairman has just attempted to demolish a mailbox with her vehicle, and physics has issued a decisive ruling." The comments were pouring in faster than he could read them, with neighbors and strangers alike expressing amazement at the destruction. I walked over to examine my mailbox, running my hand along its surface like I was checking for damage. "Looks fine to me," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should have your brakes checked, Darlene. That's a pretty dangerous mechanical failure." The crowd erupted in barely suppressed laughter, and I could see her face getting redder by the second. A police officer arrived about 10 minutes later. Apparently, several neighbors had called 911 when they heard the crash. The officer was professional but clearly struggling not to smile as he surveyed the scene. Darlene's car looked like it had been in a demolition derby, while my mailbox stood there looking like it had just been installed by the most careful contractor in the world. "Ma'am, can you explain what happened here?" the officer asked Darlene, pulling out his notepad. Her explanation was a masterpiece of creative fiction, involving brake failure, mechanical problems, and dark hints about modified mailboxes that somehow caused accidents. The officer listened politely, took some measurements, and then asked the obvious question: "If your brakes failed, why didn't you steer away from the mailbox?" That's when Darlene's story started falling apart faster than her front bumper. Darlene's story crumbled as quickly as her car. First, she claimed she swerved to avoid a cat, then it changed to a dog, and eventually she muttered about something in the road, but no one had seen anything. It was a disaster of her own making. Meanwhile, Sadie's camera footage showed her backing up, accelerating purposefully, and aiming directly for my mailbox with surgical precision. By the time the tow truck arrived to haul away what was left of Darlene's vehicle, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the show. People were taking pictures, sharing videos, and generally treating the whole thing like free entertainment. Darlene, meanwhile, had called someone to pick her up, and she spent the wait time glaring at my mailbox like it had personally betrayed her. As her ride pulled up, a beat-up sedan driven by someone who was clearly doing her a reluctant favor, Darlene turned to me one last time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You think you're clever, but I know what you did, and I'm gonna prove it." I looked at my perfectly normal-looking mailbox, then back at her. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Darlene. I just installed a regulation white mailbox exactly like you requested. Maybe the problem isn't the mailbox." The morning after Darlene's automotive encounter with physics, I woke up to find my mailbox covered in what looked like chocolate pudding but smelled considerably worse. Someone had spent quality time coating every surface with a mixture of mud, grass clippings, and what I sincerely hoped was just really old food waste. It was obviously Darlene's handiwork, partly because she was the only person in the neighborhood who hated me enough to do something this petty, and partly because she'd left footprints in the soft dirt that matched the white sneakers she'd been wearing during her previous midnight adventures. Within an hour of my discovery, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a man in a cheap suit, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Lane? I'm here for the HOA compliance inspection. We've received reports that your mailbox violates several municipal codes." Behind him, parked conspicuously in full view of the entire neighborhood, was Darlene's rental car. Apparently, she'd wasted no time replacing her titanium-tested vehicle. The inspector, clearly hired by Darlene, spent 20 minutes taking measurements and notes. He questioned the post depth, concrete foundation, and whether I had permits, despite me having all the required documentation. Still, he issued a citation for non-compliance with aesthetic standards. The fine was $1,000. $1,000 for having a mailbox that was too clean, too well-built, and too effective at resisting vehicular assault. The citation claimed my mailbox posed a safety hazard because it was abnormally resistant to impact, which was apparently a violation of some obscure municipal code that probably didn't even exist. But fighting it would require lawyers, court appearances, and months of bureaucratic warfare that Darlene was obviously prepared to wage. That afternoon, Sadie knocked on my door again, this time with a manila envelope that was noticeably thicker than the last one. "You need to see these," she said, spreading dozens of photographs across my kitchen table. The images told a story that was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. Darlene hadn't just been targeting my mailbox. She'd been systematically vandalizing properties throughout the neighborhood, always choosing victims who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. The photographs showed Darlene destroying garden decorations, loosening fence posts, and even pouring salt on lawns to kill the grass in perfect geometric patterns. "She's been doing this for months," Sadie explained, pointing to timestamps on the photos. "Every time someone complains about her behavior or questions her authority, their property gets mysteriously damaged a few days later. Then she fines them for having unsightly yard conditions." "Why haven't people reported this to the police?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Sadie's expression confirmed my suspicions. "Because she's the HOA chairman, and she always has plausible deniability. Plus, she's connected to the mayor's office through her ex-husband's family. People are scared of her, Garrett. She's not just some crazy neighbor, she's got real power in this town." But Sadie had been busy doing more than just taking photographs. She'd also been recording audio from her bedroom window, using a directional microphone she'd borrowed from a friend who worked in television production. The recordings were damning. Darlene talking to herself while vandalizing properties, muttering about teaching lessons and showing people who's in charge. In one particularly clear recording, she could be heard saying, "Let's see how tough this mailbox really is," just before attempting to hit it with what sounded like a sledgehammer. "I've got over 6 hours of recordings," Sadie told me, holding up a small digital device, including one from last night where she admits to paying that fake inspector to harass you. She was on her phone with someone, probably her lawyer, talking about how to manufacture code violations for people she wants to get rid of. This was the evidence I needed, but it was also dangerous. If Darlene discovered that Sadie had been documenting her crimes, our quiet neighbor would become the next target. That evening, as I was cleaning the mess off my mailbox for the second time that week, I noticed something odd in the mud mixture. Mixed in with the organic waste were small metal shavings and what looked like fragments of broken glass. Darlene hadn't just been trying to make my mailbox look unsightly, she'd been trying to damage it with abrasive materials, probably hoping to create scratches and dents that would justify her safety hazard claims. But titanium doesn't scratch easily, and the steel reinforcement was completely unaffected by her amateur sabotage attempts. In fact, the only thing her abrasive mud had accomplished was to polish the metal surfaces to an even brighter shine. My mailbox now looked newer and more pristine than it had on installation day, which was probably the exact opposite of what she'd been trying to achieve. Around 10 p.m., my security camera caught Darlene making another approach, this time carrying what appeared to be a cordless drill. The footage showed her attempting to drill holes in my mailbox post, but the titanium-reinforced steel was defeating every drill bit she tried. After breaking 3 bits in rapid succession, she threw the drill into my bushes and started kicking the post with her sneakers, which was about as effective as trying to demolish a mountain with a feather duster. The next morning brought another email, this one even more unhinged than her previous messages. "Mr. Lane," it began, "your continued defiance of HOA regulations and your obvious modifications to standard mailbox equipment constitute a clear threat to neighborhood safety and property values. I am prepared to take whatever legal action is necessary to remove this hazard from our community. You have been warned." The email was followed by a formal notice demanding that I appear before the HOA board for a disciplinary hearing. I was beginning to realize that Darlene's obsession with my mailbox had moved far beyond simple HOA enforcement. This was personal warfare, and she was prepared to use every resource at her disposal to win. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated how much evidence her own behavior was generating, and she'd failed to notice that her victims were finally starting to work together. As I forwarded her latest email to my growing file of documentation, I couldn't help but smile. Darlene thought she was tightening the noose around my neck, but she was actually weaving the rope that would eventually hang her own HOA career. The question wasn't whether she'd finally face consequences for her behavior, it was how spectacular her downfall would be when everything finally came to light. After dealing with Darlene's escalating harassment for weeks, I decided it was time to give her exactly what she seemed to want, another opportunity to destroy my mailbox. But this time, I'd be ready with something special. Working late into the night in my garage, I constructed what I privately called Mailbox 3.0, a perfect replica of my original titanium installation, but with one crucial difference. This new mailbox looked identical from the outside, but underneath the standard white exterior was a carefully engineered surprise. I'd created a decoy using a thin aluminum shell surrounding the same titanium core as my real mailbox, but with a twist. The shell was designed to fail spectacularly on impact while protecting the titanium underneath. It would give Darlene the satisfying crash she was obviously craving, while demonstrating once and for all that her midnight destruction sprees had serious consequences. Sadie set up her upgraded camera, borrowed from her bank, to capture multiple angles. We also placed a motion-activated spotlight to illuminate the front yard, ensuring the whole neighborhood would see if Darlene struck again. Wes contributed his own special touch, a live streaming setup connected to his home network, automatically triggered by the motion sensor. The moment anyone approached my mailbox after dark, the entire encounter would be broadcast live to anyone who'd signed up for notifications. Word had spread through the neighborhood about our amateur surveillance operation, and apparently, quite a few people were interested in watching Darlene's next performance. We didn't have to wait long. 3 nights later, my motion sensors triggered at 2:43 a.m. The figure approaching was in black, moving stealthily. For a moment, I thought it might be an intruder, but as the light hit, I recognized Darlene's walk, despite her attempt to disguise herself. She'd come prepared this time, bringing what looked like professional demolition equipment, a battery-powered reciprocating saw, presumably to cut through whatever reinforcement she imagined I'd installed. The irony was perfect. She was planning to use power tools to destroy what she thought was an illegally reinforced mailbox, apparently unaware that using power tools for vandalism was a much more serious crime than anything she could accuse me of. The motion-activated spotlight caught her completely off guard, flooding the area with daylight, bright illumination. She froze like a deer in headlights, literally staring directly into the camera for several seconds, with the reciprocating saw still in her hands. Then, perhaps realizing that standing still wasn't helping her situation, she decided to commit fully to her demolition mission. What happened next was captured in glorious high-definition detail by Sadie's camera system and broadcast live to 37 viewers who'd signed up for notifications. Darlene fired up the reciprocating saw and attacked my mailbox post with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally snapped completely. Sparks flew as the saw blade hit the steel reinforcement, creating a light show that was probably visible from space. But titanium and hardened steel don't care about reciprocating saws, and after 2 minutes of furious cutting that accomplished absolutely nothing except dulling her blade and creating a lot of noise, Darlene apparently decided to return to her preferred method of mailbox destruction, vehicular assault. She threw the useless saw into my yard and stalked back to her rental car, muttering what sounded like a continuous stream of profanity. This time, she backed up much further than before, clearly intending to hit my mailbox with enough force to destroy whatever reinforcement was protecting it. The livestream chat was going crazy with comments from neighbors and strangers alike. Everyone watching this middle-aged woman prepared to ram her car into a mailbox for the second time in a week. Someone had even started a betting pool on how much damage she'd do to her rental car. Darlene's second attempt was nothing short of catastrophic. Her rental sedan, a smaller, lighter model than her previous SUV, barreled toward my mailbox at what could only have been 30 miles per hour. The aluminum shell crumpled as planned, but the real drama was what happened next. The titanium core stood untouched, leaving her car in ruins. But underneath, the titanium core remained completely intact, and the impact energy had to go somewhere. Physics is unforgiving when it comes to energy transfer, and Darlene's rental car absorbed every bit of force that my mailbox didn't. The front end crumpled like an accordion, the windshield spiderwebbed from the impact, and both airbags deployed simultaneously with explosive pops that echoed through the neighborhood. Steam poured from the destroyed radiator, and various automotive fluids began pooling under the wreckage. But the real surprise was what happened to Darlene herself. The violent stop threw her forward into the steering wheel, despite the airbag, giving her what would obviously be a spectacular black eye by morning. She sat in the smoking wreckage for several minutes, apparently stunned by the realization that her second vehicle, in a week, had just been destroyed by the same immovable object she'd been obsessing over. By the time she managed to climb out of the wreckage, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the show. People were taking pictures, recording videos, and generally treating the whole spectacle like free entertainment. The live stream audience had grown to over 60 viewers, with comments pouring in from neighbors, friends, and complete strangers who'd somehow discovered our little suburban drama. "That's gotta be expensive," Wes observed, pointing at the smoking rental car. "2 cars in 1 week. Her insurance company is going to love this." He was right. Between her destroyed SUV and the rental car that now looked like it had been through a demolition derby, Darlene had probably racked up close to $30,000 in vehicle damage, all in pursuit of destroying a $200 mailbox. As the second tow truck of the week arrived to haul away Darlene's latest automotive casualty, I received an unexpected message on my phone. It was from an unknown number, but the content made it clear who'd sent it. "Mr. Lane, this is her son. I think we need to talk about my mother's behavior. She's not going to stop, and I have information that might help you." The message included a video file that, when I opened it, showed something that changed everything I thought I knew about Darlene's campaign of neighborhood terror. But that revelation would have to wait. Right now, I was busy watching Darlene attempt to explain to a police officer why she'd just deliberately crashed her second car into the same mailbox in less than a week. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, held in the community center that Darlene had basically commandeered as her personal kingdom for the past 2 years. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something big was going down, and as I walked into the community center, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and guilt. The room was packed with neighbors, their faces a mix of curiosity and expectation. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about justice, and perhaps about tearing down the walls of power that had been built on fear. Darlene sat at the head table, bruised and battered, with a black eye and a sling from her crash. She was struggling to maintain her usual authority, looking like she'd lost a fight with a mailbox twice. The retired police officer who served as the board's only voice of reason called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. I could tell he wasn't looking forward to what was about to unfold, but his sense of justice wouldn't let him ignore the mountain of evidence that had accumulated against our HOA chairman. "We're here tonight," he began, "to address serious allegations of misconduct and abuse of authority." I'd prepared for this moment carefully, organizing months of documentation into a presentation that would systematically destroy Darlene's credibility and authority. Security camera footage, audio recordings, witness statements, police reports, insurance claims, everything was arranged chronologically to tell the story of a woman who'd completely lost control and turned neighborhood governance into personal warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, connecting my laptop to the community center's projection system, "I want to show you exactly what your HOA chairman has been doing in your name." The first video clip showed Darlene's initial midnight attack on my original mailbox, bat in hand, systematically destroying my property while muttering about teaching me a lesson. The room fell completely silent as they watched their elected representative committing felony vandalism on camera. But that was just the opening act. The presentation continued with footage of her destroying Sadie's flower garden, loosening fence posts on 3 different properties, and systematically harassing anyone who'd ever questioned her authority. The audio recordings were even more damning. Hours of Darlene talking to herself about showing people who's boss and making examples of residents who didn't follow her rules. The climax of my presentation was the footage from her 2 automotive encounters with my mailbox. Watching her deliberately back up and ram her vehicles into my property, not once but twice, while the entire thing was broadcast live to dozens of witnesses, created a reaction in the room that was part shock, part outrage, and part barely suppressed laughter. By the time the second crash played on screen, people were openly shaking their heads in disbelief. "This woman," I said, pointing at Darlene, who was slumped in her chair, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor, "has cost herself over $30,000 in vehicle damage trying to destroy a $200 mailbox. She's violated numerous laws, terrorized multiple neighbors, and abused her position as HOA chairman to conduct personal vendettas against anyone who dared to disagree with her." That's when Darlene's 16-year-old son made his entrance. The teenager walked into the community center carrying a laptop and wearing the expression of someone who'd finally decided to do the right thing despite the personal cost. The room buzzed with confused whispers. Nobody had expected Darlene's own son to show up at her disciplinary hearing. "Excuse me," her son said, his voice shaking slightly but determined. "I have something everyone needs to see." He connected his laptop to the projection system and pulled up a video file that made my documentation look like amateur hour. The kid had been secretly recording his mother's behavior for months, capturing her planning her attacks, celebrating her victories, and ranting about the neighbors she intended to drive out of the community. The most damaging clip was a phone conversation between Darlene and her divorce lawyer, discussing how to use HOA violations to force property sales that would benefit her ex-husband's real estate investments. She wasn't just abusing her power for personal satisfaction. She was using it as part of a broader scheme to manipulate property values and drive out residents who wouldn't cooperate with her family's business interests. "I'm sorry, Mom," the teenager said, looking directly at his mother for the first time since entering the room, "but what you've been doing is wrong, and I can't watch you hurt more people. These neighbors never did anything to you except try to live their lives peacefully." Darlene stared at her son in complete shock, apparently unable to process that her own child had just ended her reign of terror. The vote to remove Darlene from her position as HOA chairman was unanimous among the board members present. The retired police officer read the formal resolution with obvious relief, officially stripping her of all authority and banning her from holding any HOA position in the future. The room erupted in applause that lasted nearly 5 minutes, with people cheering, whistling, and generally celebrating like their neighborhood had just been liberated from an occupying army. But the best was yet to come. As we were packing up the projection equipment, a tow truck pulled up outside the community center. Darlene's insurance company had finally done the math on her recent automotive adventures and decided that someone who deliberately crashes cars into mailboxes probably shouldn't be trusted with rental vehicles. Her current rental was being repossessed, leaving her stranded at her own disciplinary hearing. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in Darlene's front yard. Word through the neighborhood grapevine was that her insurance premiums had become unaffordable, her ex-husband's family had cut off financial support to avoid association with her legal troubles, and her son had chosen to live with his father rather than continue enabling his mother's destructive behavior. The woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood for 2 years was finally facing real consequences for her actions. On a sunny Saturday morning, exactly 1 month after Darlene's final automotive encounter with my mailbox, I stood in my driveway with a cup of coffee, watching the moving truck load up the last of her belongings. My titanium mailbox stood exactly where I'd installed it, unmarked by its adventures except for a small plaque Wes had made. Undefeated champion 2-0. Sadie walked over to join me, carrying her own coffee and smiling wider than I'd ever seen her smile. "So, what are you going to do now?" she asked. "Run for HOA chairman? You'd have my vote." I considered it for about 2 seconds before shaking my head. "I built that mailbox because I wanted to receive my mail in peace," I said. "Mission accomplished. Let someone else deal with the politics." As Darlene's moving truck disappeared around the corner, taking our neighborhood's biggest problem with it, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something so solid, so well-engineered, and so completely immovable that your enemies destroy themselves trying to tear it down. 1 mailbox, 1 woman, and 2 very expensive lessons in the fundamental laws of physics. The neighborhood is peaceful now, and my mail arrives on time every day. And if anyone else wants to test their vehicle against titanium engineering, well, my mailbox is ready for the challenge.
That's it for now from QA Stories. Make sure you're subscribed and the bell's on. The next story might just top this one.